traditionally Republicans on the FTC have been sort of pro-corporations, pro-Wall Street. Can you kind of describe that shift that you're sort of trying to bring to the FTC?
Sure, and I think this is a shift that transcends partisan boundaries as well. I think we have seen, a movement within antitrust policy over the last, 8 to 10 years, and that has been a product of some self-reflection. People have been looking back at how, the economy's been functioning, how antitrust enforcement has been going, and I think, we saw an approach that was really typical of both, the Bush and Obama years, where the political appointees that were running the antitrust enforcement agencies really had a sort of default assumption that the government should be reticent to act, that they were very worried about over-enforcement, about these sort of false positives where they sued to block a merger or enjoin conduct, and actually it turns out it would have been good for consumers. And the problem with that approach was we ended up with increasing market consolidation, with decreasing quality and rising prices for consumers. And this is something we've seen across the country. You ask people if they're satisfied with how the economy is functioning today, and it's almost unequivocally no. And that's not just antitrust enforcement, but it's had a large part to play. And I think because of that dissatisfaction, it's caused a lot of folks to reconsider our approach to various forms of economic regulation. Antitrust isn't regulation per se, it's really law enforcement, but the choices we make in how and when to enforce the law have a huge effect on our economy. And so that's been part of the conversation is what has our approach been to antitrust? Has it been the right one? And given that a lot of us really haven't been satisfied with how things have gone, we've been willing to reconsider some assumptions in how we've done things in the past and whether that's what we should do going forward.
Do you think that this kind of new shift toward more of a populist view on not just antitrust but other things within the Republican Party is kind of here to stay? Is this like the new normal? And do you think that's also kind of happening with Democrats? You had people like Lena Khan, who J.D. Vance said he was a fan of, if you will, and it seems like it's kind of cut both ways. Is that what you're seeing as well?
There's a lot of movement. I'll let Democrats speak for the Democratic Party, but within the Republican Party, I think this is a conversation that's going to be ongoing for a long time. Yeah. I don't think it's the case that everyone agrees on everything. That's obviously not true. But I don't see really any chance that we just revert back to the way that we were doing things in 2008. Mm-hmm. There have so many things have changed in the economy, in our political base. The party has, very rightly in my view, taken a turn to consider the interests and concerns of the working class. And I think that's a critical effort, and we need to encourage that. And so there's going to be ongoing dialogue between sort of, both strains of thought within the conservative movement and within the Republican Party about how we protect legitimate business interests and balance that with ensuring that we're protecting the average person, the consumer. And the good news to me is that we're actually having that conversation. That's not something I think that most Republicans were thinking too hard about for many years, and that has changed. I think that's one of the best changes we've seen really since President Trump came onto the scene. And that's a very good thing. I think that conversation will continue in the decades to come.
And big is bad. You've kind of had this mantra, if you will, not just government, but also corporations and business. Is that pretty much always the case, or do you think there's ever exceptions to that rule, if you will?
There's always nuance. Lawyers, we never like to paint in black and white. Everything's gray for us. But when I wrote that in my paper, the simple point I was observing was, conservatives have been very good about pointing out the dangers of concentrated political power. Yeah. When it comes to big government, we don't hesitate to say that's bad and dangerous and we need to be worried. But for some reason, when it comes to concentrated economic power, suddenly, that's fine, or they don't have a standing army, you can choose what products you buy, that sort of thing, not a big deal. And what we've seen in the last probably 10 to 15 years, and a lot of this has been driven by the behavior of large technology companies, is that it's just not true. That large economic actors have an immense amount of power over our daily lives. They control how we do our banking, how we buy and sell products, how we communicate with our loved ones, how we engage in the public sphere and political debate, the news we read, the products we buy, all of this, it's really inescapable. And that has as much of a bearing on human flourishing and the functioning of our society as our political governance. And often the two are deeply intertwined. And so we can't take this sort of what I think is a naive view that only big government is the threat. We have to realize that big business can be a threat as well. It doesn't mean that being big is illegal. That's not the position of the antitrust laws. It's not illegal to have a monopoly. It's illegal to maintain it through certain forms of conduct, but it's not illegal to be big. But when something is big, our sort of spidey sense should kick in, right? Like we should be more concerned and attentive to the potential risks there and ensuring that we're not letting, some political ideology distract us from a genuine threat that can harm people.
Yeah. And, on the topic of big tech, obviously the big tech ecosystem has sort of evolved and evolves very quickly. We saw with AI how quickly that became sort of integrated into the mainstream from just, an idea several years ago. What is keeping you up at night these days? What do you think the biggest threat with big tech is, and how do you mitigate that?
When the internet was booming in the early 2000s, the 2010s, there was, I think, a pervasive mindset, if not a consensus view that technology evolves quickly. These things are changing rapidly. We don't want to get in the way of innovation and progress, so let's just do a light touch and not interfere so that everything can develop naturally. We tried that, and we've seen the consequences. And it's a very mixed record at best, right? There's been a lot of harm that has come from that. We've seen several companies consolidate in their own markets and amass immense amounts of economic power. And that's not to say that we should be doing, ex ante regulation. I don't think we should be micromanaging the internet economy or the tech sector, but we can't just step away entirely either. We've seen what happens when antitrust enforcers, for example, take their foot off the gas and just assume the free market will work it out. The free market only functions when we have competition, and that's our job, is to ensure that we have competition. So as we look ahead to all the new technologies that are coming into play, including with AI, we don't want to regulate that. We don't want to get in the way of natural technological development, but we also want to make sure that competition is protected. And I think that's the big duty we have right now, is to avoid the mistakes of the past, to make sure we maximize the returns that we get from innovation and natural market developments, while ensuring that we protect consumers against further economic consolidation that can harm them in all of the ways that we've seen in recent years.